You know you're dealing with a different breed of villain when the story opens not with a sneaky fine about mailbox height, not with a demand that your lawn be exactly 2.5 inches high, but with the bulldozer literally cutting through Grandpa's resting place. Yeah, we're not even easing into this one. We're starting at evil Disney stepmother levels of disrespect, except replaced poisoned apples with diesel fumes and survey stakes. So here's the setup. Marlo inherits her family ranch in Wyoming. We're talking about 240 acres of wildflower meadows, cottonwood groves, and history baked into the soil itself. Her grandfather Thaddeus wasn't just any guy. He was a World War II vet who came home with nothing but a duffel bag and built a life from scratch. The barn, the windmill, the grazing pastures, every inch of it told a story. And when he passed, Marlowe scattered his ashes in a grove of cottonwoods in the southeast pasture, the place he loved most. No headstone, no fenced plot, just land, sky, and memory. Enter Ridgemont Estates, the HOA equivalent of a Bond villain. This isn't your friendly neighborhood association that argues about holiday lights. No. These people dropped survey stakes through Thaddeus's grove like they were playing Connect 4 with someone else's memories. And they did it to run a pipeline. Why? To pump water to their shiny 18-hole golf course so rich retirees could practice their swings while sipping mimosas. Because nothing says community building like desecrating a family memorial so your grass can look good in a desert. And if you're picturing HOA President Vivian Strode delivering this news with sympathy, maybe even regret, oh, bless your heart. Vivian didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. When Marlo confronted her, Vivian literally kept scrolling on her phone like a TikTok-addicted teenager, ignoring chores. The sound of her acrylic nails tapping the screen while she dismissed the fact that her crew had bulldozed through a memorial plaque is cinematic villain energy. It's Cruella de Vil meets Real Housewives of Jackson Hole. Vivian's argument? Show me a death certificate. Ashes don't count as an official burial. Yup, she actually said that. Can you imagine? That's like burning down someone's family photo album and shrugging, well, technically it wasn't in a museum. The audacity wasn't just through the roof. It was flying laps around the stratosphere. Now here's where the irony starts to taste delicious. Vivian thought this was just another day of HOA bulldozing over the little guy. But what she didn't realize is that Marlo wasn't just a rancher. She had a secret weapon. 15 years working as a water rights paralegal in Denver. That means she had spent a decade and a half untangling the kind of legal spaghetti that makes normal people cry into their coffee. She knew water law inside and out. And in Wyoming, water isn't just a resource. It's the resource. Whoever controls the water controls the future. So when Vivian smirked and told Marlo that ashes weren't legally interred, she had unknowingly poked the world's most dangerous bear, a paralegal with nothing left to lose, acres of family land on the line, and a grudge deeper than the trench that bulldozer just carved. And if you thought tearing through Grandpa's grave was the HOA's lowest move, buckle in, because in fact number 2, we're diving into the legal loophole so shady it makes a back alley card game look like Sunday school. Here is where things stop being sad and start becoming laughably ridiculous. Because the HOA didn't just rely on bulldozers and bulldog-level arrogance. Nope, they came strapped with legal fine print so obscure it might as well have been scribbled in invisible ink. And the kicker? They wielded it like it was the Constitution, claiming absolute right-of-way through land they didn't own. It's the kind of loophole that makes you wonder if the state legislature was drunk when they wrote it, or maybe just bribed with country club memberships and free golf carts. The law they invoked was a dusty Wyoming statute that basically says if there's no cheaper alternative, you can condemn private land for infrastructure. Think of it like eminent domain, but instead of roads, bridges, or hospitals, things that benefit the public, it was a water pipeline for luxury golf grass. Imagine if the city paved a freeway through your living room because the detour would cost more gas money. That's how absurd this thing was. Ridgemont's attorneys rolled into the county office and filed the paperwork with the kind of smug confidence only people billing $800 an hour can have. Their claim? Routing the pipeline along County Road would cost an extra $200,000, and that, apparently, was economically unviable. Excuse me? These are houses starting at $850,000 inside a gated community with a marble clubhouse, an artificial lake, and homes with wine cellars bigger than most Wyoming apartments. But $200K to reroute the pipeline? Oh no, that was simply too much. Better to plow through a family ranch instead. The HOA's math was as cheap as the wine at a budget wedding. $200K is pocket change compared to what they rake in. But the truth is, this wasn't about money. It was about power. It was about proving they could steamroll anyone standing in their way, especially someone they assumed was just a middle-aged divorcee trying to keep a ranch afloat. They banked on intimidation. They banked on paperwork no one had the stamina to fight. They banked on Marlo rolling over like most homeowners do when the HOA starts flexing. Spoiler alert, they bet wrong. Because here's the irony. The very same loophole they tried to use as their hammer had cracks all over it. First off, the no viable alternative argument was total nonsense. County Road was right there. Second, their so-called private condemnation relied on the idea that the pipeline was a community necessity. But in a region that gets a measly 12 inches of rain a year, how is keeping a golf course green a necessity? It's not. It's a vanity project. It's lawn care on steroids. It's water theft with landscaping. And you know who saw right through it? Marlo. Remember, this is a woman who used to spend weekends buried in water contracts so thick they could double as doorstops. Where most people would see Latin words and legal jargon, she saw trapdoors, contradictions, and escape hatches. The HOA thought they had pulled out the ultimate cheat code, but to Marlo, this was child's play. She didn't just spot the loophole, they practically gift-wrapped her ammunition she needed to take them down. But here's the part that really cooks my brain like a July sidewalk. The HOA thought this loophole was bulletproof because no one had challenged it before. And maybe in the past, they were right. Other ranchers, homeowners, and small-town folks probably didn't have the time, money, or legal know-how to fight a well-funded HOA machine. But Marlo? She was the worst possible opponent for them. She knew the law better than they did, she was more stubborn than they were rich, and most importantly, she had nothing left to lose. So while they were patting themselves on the back for winning with a dusty statute, she was already cooking up a plan to turn that loophole into a noose. And spoiler alert, it was about to get really tight around their necks. Because if the HOA's secret weapon was fine print, their next big mistake was putting that weapon in the hands of their queen bee. Fact number 3 introduces the villain you're going to love to hate, Vivian Stroud. And trust me, Cruella DeVille looks like a puppy sitter next to this woman. Every great story needs a villain, and oh boy does this one deliver. Enter Vivian Stroud, the HOA president with a Lexus, a manicure sharp enough to slice through legal documents, and a personality so frosty you'd think she was auditioning for a Disney Ice Queen reboot. If there were an official HOA president starter pack, Vivian would be on the cover, holding a clipboard in one hand and a cease and desist letter in the other. Vivian wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind of leader who thought empathy was a liability and community meant my way or the highway. Her vibe screamed corporate boardroom villain retired to the desert for a second act. In fact, that's basically what she was, a retired pharma VP who traded overpriced drugs for overpriced homes. Vivian ruled Ridgemont Estates with all the subtlety of a Bond villain explaining their evil plan. And trust me, she had plans. When Marlo confronted her about the pipeline slicing through her family's land, Vivian didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend to care. Instead, she kept scrolling on her phone, acrylic nails click-clacking like a metronome of apathy. Imagine pouring your heart out about your grandfather's ashes being desecrated, and the person you're talking to doesn't even glance up because they're too busy liking their niece's brunch photo on Instagram. That was Vivian, cold, detached, ruthless. And then came the cherry on top, the line that sealed her villain status forever. When Marlo accused her of desecrating a burial site, Vivian laughed and said, "Show me a death certificate. Ashes aren't legally interred." That wasn't just heartless. It was calculated. She knew exactly where the weak spots in the law were, and she wasn't afraid to exploit them. It was like watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, except the rabbit was a loophole, and the trick involved bulldozers. Vivian embodied everything people hate about HOAs. She wasn't maintaining community order. She wasn't protecting property values. She was weaponizing bureaucracy to bulldoze anyone in her way. Think Darth Vader if he traded in the lightsaber for a stack of legal briefs in a quarterly newsletter. She didn't just bend rules, she snapped them over her knee, smiled, and asked if you wanted to file a complaint. But here's what makes her truly dangerous. Vivian wasn't stupid. She wasn't some out-of-touch rich lady who stumbled into power by accident. She knew exactly how far she could push, exactly which statutes she could abuse, and exactly how to pressure opponents until they broke. Most people would have folded under that kind of pressure. But Marlo wasn't most people. Because while Vivian was busy flexing her HOA authority like it was a crown jewel, Marlo was taking notes. And not just the casual kind, scribbled on a napkin while sipping coffee. No, Marlo was cataloging every smug remark, every legal dodge, every unethical maneuver. And when you've got a woman with a legal mind sharper than barbed wire staring you down, it doesn't matter how expensive your Lexus is. You're playing with fire. Now, here's the twist. Vivian thought she was the apex predator in this story. She strutted around HOA meetings, radiated superiority in court, and carried herself like she owned not just Ridgemont Estates, but the entire county. But the truth is, she was about to walk straight into the perfect storm. Because for all her arrogance, Vivian didn't realize one critical fact. She was playing checkers, and Marlo was playing five-dimensional chess with water law. So if Vivian Stroud was the queen bee of the HOA hive, then fact number 4 is the moment the hive starts to crack. Because what happens when the rancher you underestimated finds a forgotten bylaw that can nuke your entire water supply? Spoiler, it gets real messy real fast. If HOA arrogance was gasoline, then this fact right here was the spark that turned it into a wildfire. See, Vivian and her HOA army thought they had all the power because they had lawyers, loopholes, and a pipeline halfway dug. What they didn't realize was that Marlo wasn't fighting on their turf anymore. She was dragging them into her arena, the wild, weird, and oh-so unforgiving world of Western water law. And spoiler alert, water law is the kind of game where if you forget one deadline, you lose your entire supply faster than you can say slice of lemon for my golf course, Arnold Palmer. So here's how it went down. One night, Marlo was flipping through dusty records in the county clerk's office, the kind of paperwork that smells like mothballs and despair. We're talking stacks of bylaws older than disco, yellowing amendments typed up on machines that predate Wi-Fi, maybe even electricity. And buried deep in those files, she found something that would make Vivian spit out her kale smoothie. Ridgemont Estates hadn't renewed their water allocation contract in 10 years. 10 years. That's not a small oversight. That's like forgetting your kid's birthday for a decade and then showing up with a gas station cupcake as if it fixes everything. In Western water law, failing to renew isn't a slap on the wrist. It's a death sentence. You don't just get fined. You don't get a gentle reminder. You lose your rights, period. It's the legal equivalent of forgetting to renew your car registration and coming outside to find your ride on cinder blocks. Except instead of a car, it's an entire community's water supply. The Ridgemont Estates golf course alone was guzzling 620 acre-feet of water per year. For reference, that's more water than 40 family ranches combined. 40 family ranches. And all of it rested on a contract that had quietly expired while Vivian was busy ordering monogrammed towels for the clubhouse. In other words, Marlo had just discovered the HOA's Achilles heel, and this wasn't a paper cut. This was a gaping wound. And the beauty of it, this wasn't some sneaky technicality. This wasn't Marlowe inventing problems out of thin air. This was black and white, ink on paper law. The HOA had dropped the ball, plain and simple. They were so busy flexing their power, they forgot to actually do the boring administrative tasks that made their power legitimate. It's like a villain buying an evil lair but forgetting to pay the property taxes. Sure, you've got a shark tank in the basement, but the county can still foreclose on you. When Marlowe realized what she had in her hands, it must have felt like a lightning bolt. For weeks, she had been playing defense, trying to protect her land, her grandfather's memory, and her cattle from the HOA's relentless steamrolling. But this flipped the entire game board, because suddenly it wasn't about her defending herself. It was about the HOA defending themselves against a mistake so colossal it could wipe out their entire empire with one county board vote. And here's where the sarcasm writes itself. This wasn't just a simple oops. This was a multi-million-dollar blunder. Imagine taking out a $4.2 million bond for your water infrastructure and then realizing you forgot to renew the contract that made it all legal. That's not poor planning. That's HOA malpractice. And when Marlowe photocopied that bylaw and tucked it under her arm, she wasn't holding a piece of paper. She was holding a guillotine with Vivian's HOA logo carved into the blade. But if you think forgetting a water contract is bad, just wait until you hear who was secretly helping the HOA cover their tracks. Fact number 5 reveals a family connection so shady it makes the whole thing feel less like a homeowners association and more like a mob family business. If this saga were a movie, this is the point where the audience collectively gasps, popcorn goes flying, and someone yells, "No way," at the screen. Because just when you thought the HOA's arrogance couldn't possibly get more cartoonishly villainous, boom. Out comes the family connection twist that would make even Game of Thrones writers say, okay, maybe tone it down. Let's set the scene. Remember that watershed board? The one with the enormous power to approve, suspend, or outright kill water allocations? The one that could decide whether Ridgemont Estates' luxury golf course lived or died of thirst? Yeah, turns out one of the board members was none other than, drumroll please, Vivian Stroud's brother. Meet Dalton Stroud. He wasn't some neutral, unbiased public servant. Nope. He was the guy sitting on the board voting yes to literally every single one of Ridgemont's water requests. Expansion? Yes. Pipeline easement? Yes. Irrigation upgrades? Yes. It didn't matter if the request was reasonable or absurd. If Vivian wanted it, Dalton rubber-stamped it like a human fax machine. And here's the kicker. He never disclosed it. Not once. Not in public records, not in meeting minutes, not in a single vote. According to ethics rules, that's not just shady, it's illegal. Board members are supposed to disclose family ties and financial conflicts of interest because, democracy and accountability. But Dalton, he decided those rules didn't apply to him. Apparently, he thought nepotism was a perk of the job, like free coffee in the break room. This was no small conflict of interest. This wasn't, my cousin sells printer ink and I approved a new copier. This was Vivian's actual brother, wielding influence over millions of gallons of water allocation, shaping the future of an entire community and tipping the scales in favor of the HOA every single time. If it sounds like a mob family controlling the water supply, that's basically what it was. Forget The Sopranos, this was the Strouds, HOA edition. Now, imagine how it felt for Marlowe when she unearthed this little tidbit. You're already fighting an HOA with deep pockets, ruthless lawyers, and enough arrogance to fill a swimming pool. And then you discover the game is literally rigged at the board level. Most people would throw up their hands, sell the ranch, and move to Montana. But Marlowe, she cracked a smile because she knew she had them cornered. Why? Because failing to disclose a conflict of interest doesn't just void the votes. It can trigger a state investigation that freezes all allocations until it's resolved. Translation? Ridgemont's water supply was now dangling by a thread, and the scissors were in Marlowe's hands. And oh, the irony. Vivian thought her brother's position on the board was her insurance policy, her secret ace in the hole. She probably bragged about it over HOA wine nights, swirling Chardonnay while whispering, "Don't worry, Dalton's got us covered." But in reality, Dalton's silence was a loaded gun pointed straight at Ridgemont. Hell, Marlowe and her attorney, Hector, filed a formal complaint. And when the state takes one look at a water board member approving deals for his sister's HOA without disclosure, that's not just conflict. That's corruption, plain and simple. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just facing a stubborn rancher. They were facing the possibility of a state-level takedown. And let's be honest, it couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people. But if you think sibling collusion was their biggest mistake, buckle up. Because in fact number 6, Marlowe goes full Sherlock Holmes, digging through archives, unearthing dusty records, and discovering the century-old water rights that would turn her from underdog to overlord. If you've ever seen a courtroom drama where the underdog attorney slams down a piece of paper and suddenly the whole case flips, that's exactly the energy of this fact. Except instead of a slick Hollywood lawyer in a suit, it was Marlowe in dusty ranch boots, half-empty coffee mug in hand, flipping through records older than anyone alive in Ridgemont Estates. And what she found? Well, it wasn't just a loophole. It was a nuclear option with "game over" stamped across the top. See, water law in the American West isn't just complicated. It's practically its own religion. Out here, you don't own water itself. You own the right to use it. And not all water rights are created equal. There's a hierarchy, a pecking order, and at the very top sits the golden goose of water law: senior rights. The older your claim, the stronger it is. And in drought conditions, the oldest claims drink first. Everyone else gets what's left, if there's anything left at all. So while Vivian and her HOA minions were busy guzzling 620 acre-feet of water a year to keep their golf course grass greener than envy, Marlowe was tracing the threads back to Antler Creek, a tributary feeding the very reservoir Ridgemont relied on. And tucked into the fine print of a deed from 1904, she discovered the Drummond family had retained senior rights to that creek when they sold their land decades later. That's right, senior rights, with a priority date of 1904, older than Ridgemont, older than the golf course, older than the entire concept of gated communities in Wyoming. Now here's where it gets delicious. Those rights were still active, but the LLC that owned the land had no idea what they were sitting on. They were about to let the rights expire in just 6 weeks. Renewal was required, and if no one filed, the state would reclaim them. So when Marlowe called up their lawyers, they basically shrugged and said, we'll take $80,000 to clear the books. That's like buying the keys to Fort Knox at a yard sale. And here's the kicker. $80,000 wasn't pocket change for Marlowe. She had to scrape it together by selling cattle, crowdfunding, and begging the ranching community for help. Every dollar hurt. But in exchange, she wasn't just buying water. She was buying leverage. Because in Wyoming, owning senior rights meant one thing. She could legally cut Ridgemont's water supply to a trickle without breaking a single law. She didn't need sabotage. She didn't need protest. She had the law itself on her side. And let me tell you, the irony here was thicker than mud in spring. Ridgemont had spent millions laying down pipelines, lawyers, and luxury golf courses. Vivian strutted around like a queen with her brother in her back pocket. And the whole time, their water lifeline depended on a creek with senior rights older than anyone in their HOA had teeth. One rancher, one determined paralegal, and one yellowed piece of paper could undo decades of their arrogance. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was poetic justice. The HOA wanted to bury Marlowe under paperwork, lawsuits, and intimidation. Instead, she buried them with a 1904 water claim that laughed in the face of their 2014 allocation. That's like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight and finding out your opponent is packing a rocket launcher. When Marlo signed those papers, she didn't just own Antler Creek. She owned the HOA's future. And she knew it. You could practically hear the pipeline humming under her land like a rattlesnake that had no idea it was about to get its head chopped off. But if you think the HOA would just accept defeat, think again. Because in fact, number 7, they went full scorched earth. Harassment, smear campaigns, and even arson. That's right. Things were about to get ugly. If you thought the HOA was going to throw in the towel after Marlo bought herself a century-old legal bazooka, think again. Nope. Instead of packing up their golf clubs and calling it a day, they doubled down. And when I say doubled down, I mean they took the HOA playbook, set it on fire, and rewrote it as a crime thriller. What started as trench digging and loophole abuse turned into harassment, smear campaigns, and, wait for it, arson. Yes, actual flames. The HOA didn't just play dirty, they played felonious. It started small, the way all petty HOA vendettas do, with emails. Every single Ridgemont homeowner woke up one morning to find a message in their inbox with the subject line, "Local rancher threatens your water access." The email painted Marlo as some selfish monster, a cranky loner sitting on acres of land and gleefully plotting to make children go thirsty. It was the kind of message written in hysterical capital letters that screamed desperation. Basically, HOA propaganda 101. And surprise, surprise, the smear campaign worked on some people. Marlo's phone blew up with blocked calls, voicemails dripping with venom. Strangers accused her of hating families, of destroying the American dream, of being a selfish cow queen. Their words, not mine. Some calls were worse. One man left 30 seconds of heavy breathing followed by, "Watch your back." Yeah, because nothing screams courage like anonymous threats from behind a phone line. But it didn't stop there. Soon it spilled into real life. Marlo was grocery shopping one afternoon when a woman in yoga pants and a Ridgemont-branded water bottle blocked her cart. Loud enough for the entire frozen food aisle to hear, she shouted, "My water bill went up 40% because of you. We have 3 kids. Don't you care about families?" The store manager eventually escorted her out, but the damage was done. Imagine going in for frozen peas and leaving with the public shaming. Classic HOA tactics. Make the target miserable until they break. Except Marlo didn't break. She endured until the harassment crossed into something darker. One night she came home to find 40 feet of her fence cut clean with bolt cutters. 16 cattle wandered onto the county road before dawn. Hours of wrangling later, she was left with $1,200 in impound fees and the kind of rage that could melt steel. Coincidence? Maybe. But come on, this had HOA fingerprints all over it. And then came the barn fire. 2 a.m, the smell of smoke, flames climbing 40 feet into the sky like a hellish bonfire. By the time the fire department arrived, Marlo's hay barn was gone. Winter feed, infrastructure, the whole thing reduced to ashes. Investigators found accelerant residue near the foundation, gasoline or kerosene deliberately poured. No suspects, no arrests, but Marlo's cameras caught a vehicle without plates passing her property that night. Boxy SUV shaped, the same kind of SUV favored by a certain HOA board. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just an HOA flexing power through bylaws and citations. This was intimidation turned criminal. It was a message written not in legal jargon, but in flames. Back down or we'll destroy you. And yet the irony is almost poetic, because every time they escalated, they only proved Marlo's point. The HOA wasn't just greedy, they were corrupt, dangerous, and out of control. And here's where Marlo's grit shines. Most people would have thrown in the towel after the barn burned. Most people would have said, "It's not worth my life." But Marlo didn't cave. She didn't retreat. Instead, she tightened her boots, grabbed her paperwork, and kept fighting. Because for her, this wasn't just about water anymore. It was about legacy, justice, and refusing to let bullies win. And if arson sounds like the grand finale, think again. Because in fact, number 8, the HOA's downfall goes public in a spectacle so dramatic it turned a local water board meeting into the Super Bowl of small town scandals. If this story were a TV show, this would be the season finale episode, where all the plot threads collide in one overstuffed, glorious meltdown. Forget Netflix courtroom dramas. This real-life waterboard meeting was juicier, pettier, and more explosive than anything Aaron Sorkin could write. Imagine a small-town community hall packed tighter than a Black Friday sale, with ranchers glaring at homeowners, lawyers sweating under bad fluorescent lights, and one HOA queen bee trying desperately not to lose her crown. That was the stage for Ridgemont's reckoning. Picture it. The Fremont County Community Center, meant to seat maybe 120 people comfortably, now crammed with over 200. Pickup trucks lined up next to Range Rovers in the parking lot, ranchers in worn boots standing shoulder to shoulder with Ridgemont residents in polos. Reporters set up cameras, microphones dangled from the ceiling, and you could practically taste the tension in the air. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be just another meeting about water flow charts. It was about who ran the valley. Front and center sat the Fremont Watershed District Board. 7 chairs lined up like judges at a talent show. Only instead of singing, contestants, they were judging whether an HOA got to keep its lifeline. And second from the left, Dalton Stroud, Vivian's sweaty, ethically compromised brother, sitting there like a man trying not to look guilty with an entire county staring at him. Spoiler, he failed. Then came the opening act. Ridgemont's attorney, a polished man in a suit probably worth more than Marlowe's truck, stood up and tried to spin the whole thing as an administrative oversight. Oversight, huh? Sure, and the Titanic just oversaw an iceberg. He painted Marlowe as vengeful, a bitter rancher hell-bent on revenge. And then Vivian took the mic, layering her voice with fake quivers, practically auditioning for a daytime soap. My neighbor's children will suffer because one bitter woman wants revenge for a construction easement. Cue the crocodile tears. But here's the thing. No one bought it. Not the ranchers, not the board, and definitely not the reporters who'd already smelled blood in the water. Because when it was Marlowe's team's turn, they didn't just speak, they brought receipts. First up, Iris Pendleton, the hydrologist, rolling out charts, models, and maps showing how Ridgemont's golf course was guzzling more water than every other private user combined. She projected slides of wells dropping, fish dying, and streams running dry while Ridgemont sprinklers misted Kentucky bluegrass. The crowd murmured like thunder rolling over the prairie. Then came the ranchers. Gil Navarro stood, voice steady as stone, and told the board how Vivian had offered him double market value for his pasture, and when he refused, his taxes mysteriously skyrocketed. 3 other ranchers confirmed the same story. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from lone cranky rancher to systemic abuse. And finally, the knockout punch. Tyrell Booker, investigative journalist, striding up with a folder full of damning documents. He laid it out plainly. Dalton Stroud voted yes on every Ridgemont allocation, never disclosed he was Vivian's brother, and violated ethics statutes so hard they basically snapped in half. He didn't just present evidence, he detonated it, page by page, while cameras flashed and Dalton visibly shrank in his chair. The room erupted. Ranchers cheered, Ridgemont residents shouted, the board chair banged his gavel so hard it nearly broke. When order returned, Dalton tried to defend himself, mumbling about how family ties weren't relevant. The board chair cut him off cold. Ethics statute doesn't care about relevance. You violated your oath. Dalton's resignation was demanded on the spot. He walked out of the room like a man headed for his own funeral. And Vivian? Oh, Vivian. She sat there, frozen, then stormed out after the verdict with the glare so sharp it could have sliced glass. Reporters captured the moment she flipped her middle finger at the crowd, a photo that went viral within hours, forever branding her as the HOA president who went down flipping the bird. But if public humiliation at a water board meeting sounds like the climax, oh no, we're not done yet. Because in fact, number 9, the HOA's financial empire collapses like a bad Jenga tower, and the fallout makes homeowners angrier than a rancher with cut fences. If the watershed meeting was the public shaming, this was the financial faceplant. And let me tell you, it wasn't just a stumble. It was a full-blown yard sale wipeout. The kind of crash where the bike flips, the helmet flies, and everyone watching gasps before bursting into laughter. Because when the dust settled, Ridgemont Estates wasn't just embarrassed, they were broke. Here's how it unraveled. Remember that fancy $4.2 million municipal bond the HOA took out? It was supposed to cover their shiny new water pipeline, pumps, and golf course sprinklers that missed it like Las Vegas fountains in the desert. Investors bought into it thinking, what could possibly go wrong? A gated community with rich homeowners paying dues. This is free money. Famous last words. Because once Marlowe cut off access to Antler Creek with her century-old water rights, the bond investors suddenly realized they weren't holding golden tickets, they were holding wet napkins. Without water, the pipeline was a useless metal straw buried under Marlowe's pasture. Without irrigation, the golf course went from Augusta National Green to Death Valley Brown in about 6 weeks. And without lush grass to prop up property values, Ridgemont's homes lost their sparkle faster than cheap rhinestones in the sun. Within months, resale values plummeted. That $850,000 golf course villa, now worth $520,000 and dropping by the week. Homeowners who bought into Ridgemont thinking they were securing a retirement paradise suddenly found themselves stuck with sand traps where their lawns used to be. Imagine paying HOA dues to live in a dust ball. It's like ordering a steak dinner and getting served a plate of kale stems. And let's talk about those dues. With the bond payment looming and property values tanking, the HOA had no choice but to crank up monthly fees. Some homeowners saw their dues triple overnight. Triple. Retirees on fixed incomes suddenly couldn't afford groceries because they were busy paying for a dead golf course and a pipeline no one could use. If irony had a bank account, it was cashing checks left and right. Investors weren't laughing either. When the county board declared the bond distressed, lawsuits flew like pigeons at a bread festival. Class actions popped up accusing Ridgemont leadership of fraud and misrepresentation. Local banks quietly pulled funding from related projects. And through it all, Vivian Stroud tried to keep up appearances, still driving her Lexus, still flashing her acrylic nails, still holding HOA meetings like she wasn't presiding over a sinking ship. Picture the captain of the Titanic insisting it's just a little ice. But here's the kicker. Marlowe didn't even need to swing the wrecking ball. She just pulled the pin on the water rights and the whole financial structure collapsed under its own arrogance. The HOA had built their empire on a foundation of vanity lawns and a single pipeline. Without water, the empire wasn't just shaky, it was worthless. And the fallout? Deliciously poetic. Ridgemont homeowners, once smug about their manicure paradise, turned on Vivian like wolves in a cage. Lawsuits weren't just coming from investors, they were coming from inside the gates. Angry retirees packed HOA meetings demanding resignations, refunds, and in one particularly spicy session, the right to convert the golf course into a community goat pasture. I wish I were making that up. The $4.2 million bond, once marketed as Ridgemont's ticket to eternal glory, was now a millstone around their necks. Default notices piled up, credit ratings tanked, and Vivian's dream of a legacy HOA empire turned into a punchline for real estate agents across Wyoming. Looking for affordable property? Check out Ridgemont Estates. Comes with free dust and bitter neighbors. And if financial ruin sounds like the end of the story, you're in for dessert. Because fact number 10 is where the tables fully turn. Marlo doesn't just win, she becomes the undisputed queen of the water supply, and the HOA has to come crawling back on its knees. Every David versus Goliath story needs that moment. The scene where the giant, once towering and smug, suddenly finds itself begging the little guy for mercy. And in this saga, that moment came when Ridgemont Estates, once dripping with HOA arrogance, found themselves bone dry, broke, and desperate. Imagine an HOA boardroom, normally buzzing with smug laughter and Chardonnay-fueled gossip, now dead silent as they realized the unthinkable. Their future rested in the hands of the rancher they'd tried to bury. By now, the pipeline was a glorified metal straw running through Marlowe's land with no water in it. The golf course was officially brown, the HOA's bond was collapsing, and homeowners were furious enough to march on the board with pitchforks if pitchforks were still legal in gated communities. And the only person standing between Ridgemont and total collapse? Marlo, the very woman they mocked, threatened, and tried to ruin. The irony could have irrigated a desert by itself. So what did the HOA do? They swallowed their pride. Well, tried to. Vivian and what was left of her board requested a good faith meeting with Marlo. Picture it. A conference table, HOA members in pressed suits looking like wilted lettuce, Marlo walking in with boots still dusty from the pasture. Every eye in the room darted away when she sat down. These were the same people who called her selfish, accused her of sabotage, even painted her as the valley villain. And now, they were basically holding out a tin cup, begging her to turn the spigot back on. Vivian, of course, tried to put on her queen bee act one last time. "We're prepared to offer you compensation in exchange for access to Antler Creek," she said, voice steady, but her eyes betraying the panic of a woman watching her empire crumble. And Marlo? She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. She simply leaned back in her chair, tilted her hat, and said, "Funny, I don't remember you offering me compensation when you bulldozed through my family's land." Boom. Mic drop. The silence in that room could have been bottled. Here's the kicker. Marlo did agree to sell them water, but on her terms. No more backroom deals, no more under-the-table collusion. She set the price high enough to make every homeowner in Ridgemont choke on their HOA fees. And she added clauses: strict conservation measures, reduced golf course irrigation, and guaranteed protections for local ranchers. If Ridgemont wanted a sip, they had to follow her rules. For the first time in the HOA's history, they weren't dictating terms, they were obeying them. And the cherry on the top, Vivian had to sign the agreement personally, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she inked her name under Marlowe's conditions. Imagine the HOA president who once sneered, "Show me a death certificate," now legally bound to pay tribute to the rancher she tried to destroy. Poetic justice doesn't even begin to cover it. The fallout was legendary. Reporters framed it as "Rancher Outsmarts HOA controls water supply." Social media turned Marlo into a folk hero. Memes of her holding a hose like Thor's hammer flooded Twitter. Local ranchers toasted her name in bars, while Ridgemont homeowners grumbled over skyrocketing fees and brown lawns. And Marlo? She went back to ranching. Cows still needed feeding, fences still needed mending. But this time, she carried herself with the quiet power of someone who knew she'd beaten the biggest bully in town. Not with fists, not with fire, but with law, grit, and patience. So what's the takeaway from all this? Fact number 10 isn't just about one rancher beating an HOA. It's about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and never underestimating the power of persistence. And then the outro, we're going to tie it all together. What Marlowe's victory means for anyone who's ever been steamrollered by an HOA. And that, my friends, is how one rancher took on an entire HOA empire, armed with bulldozers, lawyers, smear campaigns, and even fire, and beat them with nothing more than brains, grit, and a century-old water claim. It's not just a story about water. It's not even just a story about HOAs. It's a story about power, who has it, who abuses it, and what happens when the so-called little guy decides they're not going to play punching bag anymore. Marlowe didn't just win. She rewrote the rules. She reminded every smug HOA board member across America that you can only push so far before someone pushes back. And when that someone has the law on their side, well, let's just say your golf course turns into a dust bowl faster than you can say special assessment fee. And let's take a moment to appreciate the cosmic justice here. The HOA wanted control. They wanted power. They wanted water. And in the end, they handed all three to Marlowe on a silver platter. The woman they underestimated now controls their lifeline, their finances, and their future. That's not just irony, it's Shakespearean. So here's the lesson. Never underestimate the person you're trying to bulldoze. Whether it's a rancher, a neighbor, or even just a fed-up homeowner tired of being told their grass is too long. People will fight back, and sometimes they win. If you enjoyed this wild ride through HOA chaos, smash that like button like Vivian smashed community trust. Subscribe for more stories where the underdog serves poetic justice, and drop a comment. What would you have done if an HOA tried pipelining through your land? Because let's be honest, we all secretly dream of a moment when the bully gets their hose cut off.